be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while I play video games and talk to you about random life stuff. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to another episode of The Rundown, where I give you guys a no-frills explanation on characters and teams and concepts from comic book movies and TV shows and so on and so forth. Anyway, first things first, this video is going to have spoilers, as if you needed to be told that. But some people need to be told the obvious, whatever. Anyway, so I just finished watching X-Men Apocalypse, and I think one of the biggest questions people are going to have is, what was the post-credits scene about? What is Essex Corp? Well, for those of us who have been big fans of the X-Men for a pretty decent amount of time, we knew that when Apocalypse was announced to be the main villain of the X-Men movie, most likely, somewhere along the line, Essex Corp was going to come into the equation. So the question becomes this: what's Essex Corp? Well, Essex Corp is the front for a man named Nathaniel Essex, also known as Mr. Sinister. Now, why does this matter? Because in Marvel Comics, Mr. Sinister had his hand in three major events. The first was his involvement with Apocalypse. The second was his involvement in the lives of Jean Grey and Scott Summers. And the third, for those of you guys who saw the post-credit scene in Deadpool, is Cable. Now, a little bit of backstory here. We know that Apocalypse has been around for thousands and thousands of years and so on. I've got a big video explaining his whole backstory if you want to check that out. And I've got a video on the Four Horsemen and a video on his powers, and anything you want to know about Apocalypse can be covered on this channel, and you'll find all those links down in the description. But during Apocalypse's lifespan, he had basically traveled the world, conquering civilizations, different things like that. Well, during this time, he came across a guy named Nathaniel Essex in the 1800s in England. And Nathaniel Essex was like the Charles Xavier before Charles Xavier, in the sense that he was like, somewhere along the line, there's going to be this massive surge in mutant population. Mutants are just going to start popping up all over the place. There's been a few here and there, but they're mostly conjecture and rumor. Nobody really believes they exist, but, there's going to be a huge influx of them. Well, the scientific community was like, you're crazy, Nathaniel Essex, get out of here, go do your own weird whatever it is that you do. Well, Essex had actually been kidnapping those that he believed were mutants and experimenting on them, trying to discover why it was they were mutants, trying to figure out where their powers came from. Well, during this time, he runs into Apocalypse, and Apocalypse is surprised by what he learns, because Apocalypse did not know that he was a mutant. Instead, he just thought he was the only person in the world that could do the kind of stuff that he could do. But once he learned he was mutants, that's where his ideology came, that he should be a leader of the world's mutant population. He should be their messiah, and that kind of crazy thinking that makes his story so awesome. But nonetheless, so he goes to Sinister and says, I will bestow upon you the gift of eternal life so you can spend the rest of your life studying mutant genome and all that kind of good stuff. There's more that goes into it, and I've got a video on Mr. Sinister Explained, which will be in the description as well if you want to check that out. Jumping forward 100 years, Sinister always operated in the background, like no one ever really knew who he was. They just knew there was a guy named Nathaniel Essex, and Sinister was a total mystery to the world at large. As an example, during World War II, he was operating with the Nazis, but they only knew him as Nathaniel Essex, and he may have even had an alternate name during that time period. But nonetheless, he operated in the Auschwitz concentration camp. And so when Captain America and Namor the Submariner and Bucky Barnes and the original Human Torch Jim Hammond, when they showed up and they freed the Auschwitz concentration camp, Sinister bailed out. Well, the issue here was that he recorded all of his findings in this little journal. It was literally just called Sinister's Journal. Well, this journal was discovered in like the 1980s, I think, or something like that, by a scientist who would later use those findings to go on and found the Weapon X project, which of course gave us Wolverine, it gave us Deadpool, and all that kind of good stuff. Now, in terms of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, because of Sinister's experience with messing around and examining the human genome and mutant physiology and all that kind of good stuff, he had come to the conclusion that somewhere along the line, two mutants would be born and they would produce a child that would just be stupidly powerful. I mean, just powerful to the point where it would be godlike in terms of its abilities. Well, he eventually discovered that this would be Jean Grey and Scott Summers. The problem was this: the Phoenix Saga happened. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, the Phoenix Saga was a point whereby Jean Grey was believed to be the Phoenix Force, and she had all these crazy powers, and eventually it was all retconned and all that kind of good stuff. I've got a video on that as well. But nonetheless, during the original Phoenix Saga, the way the story ended, Jean Grey seemed to have sacrificed her life in order to save the universe, and so everybody thought she was dead. Cyclops thought she was dead, and the X-Men thought she was dead, and everybody thought that she was gone. And Sinister was sitting around like, well, that sucks. I mean, I gotta find a way to produce a kid with Jean Grey and Scott Summers so I can use that kid to kill Apocalypse, because Sinister just hated Apocalypse. And so what he does is he creates a clone named Madeline Pryor. Now, when he first made Madeline Pryor, it was believed that she was incapable of doing anything, and in fact, Sinister was actually right with this belief. The difference was that when Jean Grey sacrificed her life, the Phoenix Force sparked a bit of life inside of Madeline Pryor and brought her to life. Why it did that? I don't know. Comics. Anyway, so Madeline Pryor sparks to life, and she's got all the powers of Jean Grey: telepathy, telekinesis, everything except the Phoenix Force. And so Sinister says, "Hearken alas, I can use Madeline Pryor to produce a child between Scott Summers and Madeline, and I can make this child super strong." And so he says, "Madeline Pryor, go out into the world and find Scott Summers and then produce a child with him." And Madeline says, "Okay." And so she eventually finds Scott Summers, and they produce a kid named Nathan Summers. Well, during this time, Apocalypse had woken up, and Apocalypse was like, "I see what Sinister's trying to do here. He's trying to make a kid that can kill me. Well, I'm going to beat him to the punch, and I'm going to kidnap that kid, and I'm going to use him as a host for when I need to transfer my essence again." And so Apocalypse kidnaps Nathan Summers, and then this leads to this great big huge conflict between Cyclops and X-Factor and X-Force and the Inhumans, and just this it's like the world against Apocalypse. And of course he is able to hold them off, although he's eventually defeated. And the story ends up leading to Nathan being taken into the future, where he becomes the character Cable. But nonetheless, I digress. The fact remains that Sinister is this really cool villain who always operates behind the scenes. He's been watching Jean Grey and Scott Summers virtually their entire lives and manipulating the two of them into eventually getting together. He's a really, really cool villain. He can shapeshift. He has a healing factor. He can control different kinds of energy. He has telepathy, telekinesis, your standard run-of-the-mill powers for like your villains who are really cool in the X-Men universe. But anyway, if you want to know more about him, check out my video on Mr. Sinister Explained, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.